Russia is preparing to step up mobilization. Signs indicating this have been noted by the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine. Recently, there's been a sharp increase in the number of job vacancies in Russia related to military registration. Currently, there are about 2,500 such job postings on specialized websites, and most of them have appeared recently. They are primarily looking for workers in large cities: Moscow, St. Petersburg, Samara, and Yekaterinburg. At the same time, our intelligence notes that there are no signs of preparations for a large-scale mobilization of reservists yet. Also, the Kremlin will likely avoid announcing a new open wave before the parliamentary elections. I will ask our studio guest about the potential for a possible Russian mobilization and its impact on the front lines. This is Vadim Kushnarov, an observer for the Militarity Portal. Mr. Vadim, I am glad to welcome you.
Good day.
So, if we are talking about mobilization in Russia, how should we generally assess the Russian mobilization potential? How many people can they call up for service with this mobilization? And how many of them are on paper? And how many of them can actually go into the army?
From what is known from open sources, as cited by Western military observers, this potential, let's say, de jure, is at the level of up to 5 million personnel. These are purely calculations that are cited based on age indicators of potential draftees, and this figure is formed accordingly. In other words, this is the most, let's say, suitable demographic based on this indicator. But if we look at the list of those who could join promptly, it's on the level of 1,200,000 to 1.5 million. That is what certain Russian analysts are citing directly regarding this issue. If we look at other criteria that are being cited today and could indicate preparation, then it is indeed the conducting of exercises that began back at the beginning of this summer. In other words, these are command and staff exercises specifically for the departments responsible for mobilization. As for the present, we also saw this same week that the enemy, under the guise of updating data, is conducting a certain kind of covert mobilization. However, this phenomenon is still sporadic for now, and it's too early to equate it to any such trends.
So the main wave, so to speak, will begin after the elections, yes, in Russia. Everyone is talking about these elections, which in principle don't mean much, as I understand it, in Russian politics, these elections. But do you think they won't dare, right, to mobilize people on a large scale before the elections?
When analyzing this issue, it should also be taken into account that partial mobilization is still in effect in Russia. That is, the Russian president's decree from back in 23 has not been canceled by anyone. Accordingly, this process is ongoing, but it is proceeding in other forms through recruitment via financial incentives. That is, these are one-time payments, luring people with high salaries. And we see that this worked in previous periods, when from remote regions that were not economically successful, a very large number of, let's say, mobilized individuals ended up in the ranks of the Russian occupation army. As of today, what we can see is that with these tools, the Russians are no longer fully meeting their personnel needs, because the economic crisis means not all regions can currently provide the specific financial incentive to attract new recruits. Then we saw other approaches to recruiting people into the Russian army. This includes agitation among students. There were even certain quotas set that 2% of students from every higher education institution had to be sent.
I don't think it went well for him. No, it doesn't look like there were many volunteers.
Exactly, because they really see that the prospects of being recruited into the Russian army, especially under such conditions where, let's say, you can't choose your place of service or your position, well, the conscious part of Russian society is still trying to avoid such things.
So we're talking about mobilization. We're not talking about contracts, right? But specifically, mobilization. How will that work? Because you'll end up with people in the army who are getting big money on contracts and others who are doing the same thing and not getting that. Well, they're getting some kind of salary, theoretically. Isn't this a prerequisite for some unhealthy internal processes in the army?
Analyzing this question, I have a counter question. Are these contractual obligations actually being fulfilled among those who have already signed one? In other words, we see that many Russian military personnel, and this even reaches pro-Russian propagandists, they cite examples where even the money promised under the contract does not reach the military personnel directly. Therefore, I think that this factor will not have such a high and significant impact.
Okay. You mentioned 1 million or 1.5 million, right? Like, which they can pay as a one-time payment? Yes? Is that how I understand it?
These are one-time, yes, incentives, but they vary from region to region.
But are they capable of absorbing them? For this, I understand, you need some kind of training grounds, training, people, specialists who will do the teaching. Is there infrastructure designed for such a number? Do they have the capacity to accept and train these people?
Here, we're talking more about not a one-time mobilization, meaning putting that many people under arms in a single month. We're more likely to see a certain prolongation over time. As of today, if you take a closer look at the official numbers, it appears that in 2026, the Russian forces were successfully able to recruit a total of 221,000 people for active military service in the ongoing war against Ukraine. It is a significant figure that really highlights the scale of their mobilization efforts during that specific year. But their losses amounted to 226,000. In other words, we see that the level of mobilization and other measures intended to recruit the population for the war against Ukraine cannot fully satisfy the needs of the Russian generals. So this will most likely be prolonged over time and broken down into several periods. First and foremost, this will be aimed at providing for the contingent of occupation troops that the Russians have deployed against Ukraine.
And what do you think? Will this mobilization be officially announced after the elections? Or will it, most likely, continue to be done using these methods of covert mobilization? Or will covert mobilization not work here anymore?
I think that, in reality, from the perspective of the actual results and the plan, such tools don't really play a major role. In other words, if they pass this stage of, let's say, legitimizing their parliament, then their hands will be untied and they will be able to package it in any format, whether it's open mobilization or continuing it in the form it currently has.
So, in either of those forms, they will be able to recruit the number of people they need, right?
Exactly.
And this won't cause any internal. Well, I understand that this is probably more of a question for political scientists. Internal disputes within society.
Well, let's say we can just recall the moments related to the partial mobilization in 2023, and that was over 2 million relocants who left the borders of the Russian Federation in 1 year.
So the maximum reaction is just to run away. I understand.
Well, that's what I can say from the perspective of my professional perception.
Thank you very much for coming to our studio. I remind you that we were speaking with Vadim Kushnikov, a commentator for the Militarny portal.